Are you a business owner trying to stay connected with your customers during the state of emergency in Trinidad and Tobago? Stick around because we have guests that will share much needed advice with you.
Your strategy has to involve your mindset, and your strategy then involves the actions that you take to move you from where you are to where you want to be.
I'll start with what Visa isn't, right? Visa doesn't issue credit card. We don't issue credit. So Visa doesn't do that, which surprises a lot of people.
We'll use a phrase like, well, things changed, but things don't change. People change things. All the legislation that has been passed, somebody advocated for that. And so International Women's Day is to commemorate that history of women making change.
Several of the banks have started to migrate their existing debit card portfolio to chip and pin EMV technology. So the SMEs are going to benefit from a wide range of customers who previously did not have a credit card but only had a debit card.
Good morning again. Welcome to the live series Straight Off the Bat, a show that covers the need to revive, survive, and adapt to the new normal of COVID-19. We usually do this on a Thursday. Today I got a little special. I got dressed up because there's only so long you can stay at home without... Anyways, I dress up for you because we speak to individuals across the financial industry who will help you understand financial literacy and education. Today, we're discussing what it means to know your customer during the lockdown. We are joined by a couple who are the co-founders of Caripay, a company that provides a seamless and secure solution to onboarding new customers. Kesha Julien was an economist at the Ministry of Trade, and she's joined today by Louis Kinley. He is originally from Seattle and has worked with software teams in the Fortune 500, Fortune 500, and led engineering for startups in the service of companies like Microsoft, which I am actually a former employee of. So we could, tick off the list of things that we've learned. I'm your host, Pauline Joseph, and today we are giving you actionable items. That's very important. We're not here to share opinion. We're here to give you actionable items to help you grow your business. Before we start, make sure to smash that follow button because we go live on Thursdays and we have quality conversations. I'm a bit biased, but I think we have quality conversations. All right. So we have, I think, Louis, you are muted. So if you could okay. So just give us some quick insight, Kesha, first to what Caripay is, the simplest of words, please.
So what Caripay does in a nutshell is that we are a regulated technologies company. We provide services that help to improve your compliance process. So we take you from being paper first to digital first, depending on your level of risk that you're willing to take. So we do anything from customer onboarding to approvals processes, automating that whole processes to helping you pre-fill some of your regulatory forms.
Sounds kind of technical, but that's okay. We have some slides for you guys so you can dissect what you just said, because a lot of the times things can seem a bit technical from an enterprise perspective. As a small business owner, it's a little different in terms of your execution, but the theory remains the same. As it relates to Louis, you are originally from Seattle. Can you tell us about that change, that shift that you had to experience culturally coming to Trinidad and Tobago? What's the major difference for you?
Wow, Trinidad has taught me a lot of patience. For better or worse, just the shift in, I suppose how organized things are at times. It's been definitely a learning opportunity.
Well, based on my understanding of Seattle, there's a lot of rain. So I was expecting, the whole sun versus rain. Is it true that it's always raining in Seattle?
Half the year. Yeah, half the year. Then the other half, you might not get rain for 3 months straight. So it's very green, lush, just like here. Similar in a lot of ways, actually.
Oh, okay. Good to know. All right. So we're going to get into it because I know our audience is out there. We're accustomed to taking notes, which I am as well in this session today. And we are going to be showcasing some sort of a PowerPoint. So in between there, after they have presented the information, where I'm going to come in and ask the question. So feel free to go into the comments below, everybody, and ask your questions because I will ask them on your behalf after. So let's get to it.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Pauline. Thank you to the Bankers Association for the opportunity and everyone who's tuned in. We can go to the next slide here and just jump right to it. So really quick, wow, our numbering is terrible on that slide. I apologize for that. But really, the agenda that we're going to go through today is, first, what does it really mean to know your customer? Is it, there are a lot of different ways, and for SMEs, there's a range of things. Who cares, right? Because as a small business, hey, it's pretty easy to just keep doing things the way you've done it, to keep it simple. But there's actually a reason that a lot of these things are in place. And that leads us to what the purpose is. And following that, of course, there are a lot of opportunities and there are some real costs involved. So we just want to touch on all of those things and really let you walk away with an understanding of, what KYC is at a little bit deeper level. Understand, what the purpose really is and what some of the opportunities are for you coming out of that. Next slide. Right. So what do we mean by knowing your customer? For, like Pauline has mentioned in the past, the small business who has a shop, who has a few shops, has an online store, that means different things, right? When somebody walks into your store and meets with you and purchases face-to-face, of course, you know that customer in a number of ways. You know their face. If you really need to, if you're selling an item that's high value or in a certain category, you might need to check their ID. Nowadays, with of course, the state of emergency, everywhere you go, you have to write down, do your contact tracing. So this really has taken on different meanings in different contexts for different people. So we go to the next slide. We'll start with, what does it mean for that small business that's got some online presence? You have your Facebook store going, you have your IG page making sales. And for you, knowing your customer might be as simple as, what's their email? What's their social media handle? Are they sending you things through your DMs? Is that coming in through a different system, right? You have some idea of who they are, but a few pictures may not really help you understand what the opportunities or risks are. So if you take that a little bit further, you might need to collect their name and their phone. And if we go a little bit further, their delivery address, right? Now you have some idea who this person is. You have a way to get in touch with them. You have the name that they've given you and the address they've asked you to send things off to. So, hey, you're a third of the way there. But for a lot of businesses, I think we stop there. We take that and say, hey, we've figured out who this person is. We've done business with them. We understand what they came for, the product that they bought. We may even understand some of their motivations. But if we're doing more business-to-business transactions, you are a contractor, a plumber, electrician, your customers might actually want to know you. But if you're doing that contract for another small business, it might be in your best interest and theirs to share that licensing, share your business information, and get a little bit stronger sense of who that customer is. If you go to the next step, you might collect a little bit more evidence, right? You might now really go into the due diligence side of things and look at their national ID, look at their driver's permit, find some way of getting an actual proof of that address, right? In olden days, you might get a postcard with a code on it or something else that you had to collect from your mailbox and type in somewhere to say, hey, I received it. You sent it. This is really me. In different contexts, knowing that someone, you hired somebody to, come and do some deliveries for you to, help your business reach your customers. So is that intermediary now also in a way your customer? And should you know if they're licensed to drive? If you go on to the next level, all those things together help you understand this persona, your customer persona, whether they are in a certain demographic that's likely to buy from you, they're an early adopter, they're not. Maybe there's someone who's likely to be a repeat customer because of some factors that you've found from your previous interactions or from your process of knowing your customer. With that persona, now you can really start to understand the whole picture. So if you go to the next slide, you can start to now understand the risks that that individual or that business or customer poses to you and your stakeholders. And with that, you can even go on to the next slide and really understand the full range of opportunities. So really, when we think about knowing your customer, you have different levels of that. If you are running your IG page, you have half of this at least, and you've built up something of a persona because odds are you got that traffic through either some kind of marketing or some targeting to get to your audience, right? So you already understand that persona a little bit, but when your systems are disconnected, it's hard to understand the whole picture until you've really looked at the whole profile. But aside from that, who really cares? Let's take a look at the next slide, which is why, when we as small businesses think about doing this and have maybe done it ourselves, why are we really doing this? Because ultimately, the central bank and the FIU and a bunch of global parties in the financial system really care and have really their work cut out for them in protecting, keeping that system safe. So locally, FIU has their list of listed businesses that need to actually do some level of due diligence and verification of who their customers are in order to conduct business. And you need to keep records of that. So if you are a jeweler or an accountant or a car dealer or real estate agent and a handful of other categories, you actually have to collect some amount of this information, including a national ID, before or at some point during your business relationship. Now, the central bank and FIU really come together to shape that guidance. And if you're interested or at all curious, it's not a bad thing to know. It can be a little bit lengthy, but there's a lot of interesting things in there. And they actually released temporary guidance at the start of the pandemic on how to do this all digitally. And when we think about, even as a small business, as an entrepreneur, you've got your thing going, and maybe you're making a lot of sales, but are those sales all legit? And how do you know? So if we go on to the next.
Hi, we're gonna go on a little break and we'll be right back.
but that was like my first experience with money. Very, very first experience.
I've been in banking since I was a teenager.
Hi, everyone. If you're just joining us, this is Straight Off the Bat, a show that covers the need to revive and survive to the new normal. We just have to get accustomed to this life we're living in. We are here with the folks at Caripay having a discussion around knowing your customer. Make sure to smash that follow button because we do this every Thursday. And we want to make sure and get your feedback as what you want to know in terms of financial literacy and education. So I'm going to give the floor back to Luis and Kesha so they can give you some insight about knowing your customer.
All right. So before the break, we just touched really briefly on some of the actual regulations, the people who actually care that you really do know who your customers are. And I really want to spend a bit more time focusing on what the purpose is, because all of these bodies, all these groups come together to do what they see as in the best interest of financial inclusion, of safety for the financial system. So the rules and guidelines that are released are very, very well thought out and very complete. And there are a lot of reasons that they exist, but ultimately, if you are one of those listed businesses, you have a responsibility to do your part to help protect the financial system. And even as an SME, you as well have a part, because it's actually surprisingly easy to, not really be sure of what's happening on your platform or through your business. If it all seems okay and the numbers make sense to you, you may not be aware. But if we go to the next slide, the amount of suspicious transactions that can go through the system in a single quarter, now mind you, this was just January to the end of March last year, the FIU had an estimated 24 billion TT dollars of suspicious transactions reported. So obviously that's not just doubles vendors, but there's, it's a large net that they have to catch. So ultimately, these regulations are all designed to prevent bad behavior, right? To keep everyone safe. And that could be, hey, if you are running your Facebook store and you're going to meet people to make that sale, there's a surprising amount of risk. And surprisingly, a lot of folks feel that the best way they can avoid that risk is just to take a friend and meet somewhere public. But when we think about keeping everything safe, that means that, your business relationships are secure, that the vendors and all the stakeholders you work with are also doing their part, they're following the rules. And you know what that means for you is that you're probably going to get paid on time. And you're probably going to work with companies who actually respect the work that you do together and that hire you with a purpose. So it leads to better transparency, right? Better accounting. Every year you have to do your audited financials, do your annual returns. As part of that, if you really knew deeply who your customers were, you could also look at how many politically exposed persons you might have been serving, for instance. And that might lead you to understand your business in a different way. But ultimately, all these regulations lead to better data. It might be a bit tough to wrap your mind around, but ultimately, as SMEs, as entrepreneurs, as everyone, the better data you have on who your customers are, the better you can provide services to them. So as a small business, if you had a shop in a mall, for instance, you would understand your general customer profile to be maybe geographically specific, maybe of a certain demographic, but you may have a hard time segmenting out your customer base and understanding, wow, well, I did really well on Saturday afternoons from this demographic, and I maybe a different time of day this other one. And maybe that would allow you to change your messaging or change what you have on offer. Now, if we jump that up a level to someone who's taken that business online, again, maybe it makes sense to run a different set of ads in the morning and a different set of ads on the weekends. But if you don't have that data, it's going to be hard for you to think about that targeting and to make that happen. So when you understand your customers better, you can really build your business and meet their needs a lot better. If we go to the next slide. So this all leads to the concept of a CRM, customer relationship manager, right? There are a lot of them out there. And if you are, I suppose, if you think about how you manage your customer relationships, how you manage your sales, how you manage your different marketing efforts, if you're doing copying and pasting or using spreadsheets, then you might want to investigate what a CRM is. If you have some people sending you orders through your email or your website or Facebook, all those things, it's real hard to keep track of if you don't have one system of record. And it's also really hard to understand what data you have if it's not all in one place. And there are a handful of them out there. Lots of them have, a basic free tier that does a lot of things for you. But if you are one of those listed businesses, or you want a little bit more trust in who you're doing business with, these don't quite allow you to do that KYC side of it, to really deeply understand, hey, this person is this licensed real person at this address, and to really build a complete profile. But I think that leads us to what some of the opportunities are, which is what Kesha is going to talk about next. So if you can go to the next slide.
So as Louis said, there are a lot of opportunities in having clean data from your customers. One of them is really helping you to grow and iterate as a business. So like you said as well, that in being able to use your data to create customer segments and understand their purchasing needs, you're able to provide a custom service for them that sets you apart. So a lot of the times when we go on places like Amazon or Walmart, we wonder how are they able to target us so effectively. It's because they've collected that data and they've used that data to really customize that experience for us. And I think that it could really benefit a lot of companies in Trinidad to be able to provide that very customized services, those customized services, particularly during COVID times where people are at home and they would like to feel like they're included again in society. Because right now we feel a little bit segmented from each other. So providing those customized services, using that data that you've collected from them and providing those customized services, it helps to not just connect you to your customer, but your customer to you. And it also helps to lower your customer acquisition costs as well. Because now you don't just do broad random marketing or broad random targeting. You can actually make it more specific and more focused and really put your time and effort behind those customers that you know are your really engage with your business. If we go to the next slide, there are opportunity costs as well from not knowing who your customers are. Well, one is that you don't know who you're doing business with, and that's a risk, particularly for certain types of entities as it relates to anti-money laundering and financing of terrorism, AML, CFT. And one thing that we have to realize is that for large purchases like vehicles and cars and jewelry, it can be a vehicle for money laundering. And we want to make sure that you as a business is protected from that. So doing KYC actually helps you to be protected from participating in AML CFT. We all know also that very manual, paper-based KYC processes they're time-consuming, they're frustrating, not just for the business but for the customer as well. So that's an opportunity cost, of not doing digital KYC, which is available, and without having that clean data, you don't know what's working and what's not. Without having data, full stop, you don't know what's working and what's not for your business. So we do advocate that people collect KYC information and use it not just for your regulatory purposes, but for the growth and the expansion of your business. If we go to the next slide, we know that in some cases, very simple CRMs can be as low as $9. Those are like HubSpot that allow you to just collect customer name, customer email addresses. But if you want to go specifically for a KYC CRM, it can range between US $500 to $1,000 a month, depending on the regions and the features. Now, some of the larger KYC companies in the US, they don't operate within smaller regions like this, but there are those like our company that actually operate within this region that provide those services. I guess that brings us to the end of this presentation. Go to the next slide. If you want any additional information, you can reach out to us at offthebat@getqkyc.com. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that. That's a lot to digest, and I have a lot of questions, but we're going to go on a short break. And on the other end of it, we'll talk about what action items businesses should take after seeing this presentation. Welcome back to Straight Off the Bat, a show that covers the need to revive and survive and adapt to the new normal of COVID-19. We are here with Kesha and Luis from Caripay, and we are discussing the importance of knowing your customer because there's an economic impact to an entire industry because the KYC has its own industry, which requires solutions, right? And Kesha mentioned something earlier that really piqued my interest because you spoke about how the customer feels. And I want to elaborate that a little bit more because a great example is me just putting on fancy clothes because I was just like, I just feel disconnected. As somebody who is an extrovert, any form of fashion that somebody could connect to me, I feel better. And it's interesting because I see it with Amazon. You would, look at your wish list to see what you actually might be dreaming about buying. And as soon as it goes on sale, bam, I go ahead and buy a kettle I didn't need, but I want it anyways. And that's that feeling. And I want you to elaborate more on that, Kesha, because I feel like you have that data aspect, but you're also a consumer. So can you connect the dots a little bit more as it relates to the upselling when you have that data from your customer?
Sure, no problem. One thing that we always hear, and I guess by now it's an old adage, that data is your new oil. Data is a lifeline for any organization, and knowing your customer on a deeper level from the data that you collect from interacting with them, it just allows you to be able to say, hey, okay, my customer likes blue shirts on a Monday. I'm going to offer him blue shirts on a Monday because that's what he likes. That's what, I didn't realize that Lewis was wearing a blue shirt there. Hi, Lewis, with that blue shirt. But yeah, it allows you to connect with your customer on a deeper level than you would have otherwise. And I think one of the things that we don't do a lot of, particularly in this region, is use the data that we have on hand to really understand what our customers want, what they need, and how they feel in interacting with us. And a big part of persons doing businesses with you is how they feel about you. That's all a big part of the whole buying and selling process. And taking the time to use the information that they've already freely provided to you to get an idea of how they feel and really targeting them on that level allows you to connect with them in a way that makes them want to do business with you and to do repeat business with you. So it's really essential that when you're doing your KYC, don't just do it with a regulatory framework in mind. You also do it from the aspect of, hey, I really want to genuinely know who is buying from me. I want to genuinely know who my customers are on a level that allows me to know them and them to know me.
It's bound to happen. At one point in time, the mute conversation will happen. It's interesting because we get a lot of international media about all this data collection and how the negative impact it has on people. And because I'm in the space, I kind of brush it off. But a lot of businesses feel this need to be like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do this data? Because there's also the cybersecurity conversation. What advice would you give to a small business owner who is approaching this space for the first time and feels uncomfortable because of the news that they would have heard online?
Well, I guess Lewis could speak to the technology part of that one.
Right. Wow. There are a lot of considerations, right? I think a lot of us still just honestly fall back to WhatsApp or Instagram or Facebook Messenger most of the time, right? That's where, hey, we're snapping pictures and sending whatever needs to be sent just to get the deal done, just to make it happen. And as that individual, I think you have to be a little bit concerned. But as the small business that's collecting that, where do you store that? What's your responsibility to your customers? What's your responsibility to your business to keep all of that information safe and accessible and useful, and really, use that to continuously engage your customers? So, honestly, emails, terrible idea. I know it's really easy. HubSpot, terrible idea. There are dedicated systems that you can use to collect and manage that. The different providers have different options. Google Drive, not really the best, not the worst, but definitely not the best. There's a whole range though, and it does take a little bit of research.
Yeah, I know you mentioned the Excel spreadsheet scenario, which I'm sure a lot of businesses out there, including me, when I now started my business, it's just getting the job done. As much as the best practices are out there, you're just focusing on getting that coin. It is what it is. At the same time, there are a lot of free tools. I know you mentioned HubSpot, but there's also MailChimp. It's a company that's based out of the States, and they have landing pages. They encourage you to form your own lead generation forms, which is basically a space for you to collect data about your customers, because ultimately it's about the amount of time you have, right? There's only so much time in the day, and if you have to pull information from WhatsApp from 10 different orders, that's going to be a long arduous process that can be eliminated if you have a landing page. It doesn't have to be a fancy website, where you collect the information, you collect the data. So when it comes to this idea of clean data, Kesha mentioned that earlier. Can you just kind of share some information on what you mean by that? Because sometimes, you have, I'm thinking an Excel spreadsheet, and you have a column, and you have, 10 columns and about 200 different rows. But what is this concept of clean data?
Well, in a nutshell, clean data is data that you have gone through and removed some of the errors, do deduplication. So it's a matter of getting information in that's correct. So you might be spelling your customer's name wrong. You want to go through and just double check that you have the person's name spelling correct, because simply by changing one letter, the customer that you have there may appear like they're on a PEP list or on a AML CFT list. So knowing that you have the information correct, knowing that it's deduplicated, it's actually really helping you. So that's what I mean by clean data. It's data that's like doesn't have errors anymore. You've gone through, you've done your due diligence to make sure that data is clean and correct.
Go ahead, Louis.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, it just gives you a much clearer picture, right? Because as she said, once you know you have one row in that spreadsheet for each person, whatever analysis or whatever questions you're going to ask of that data will now actually give you the right answer. If you have the same person in there 3 times, that might skew what you're looking at, because it's not just one person that's in there a few times.
That's a good point, especially when it comes to a person's name, because that's the identity, right? So earlier when I was talking to Luis, I was like, is it Louis or Louis? And that in a data format can also impact your communications, because even if I entered my name wrong in the landing page initially, it's your responsibility as a business owner to reach out to them and say, hey, is this error? And I find there's a disconnect with how technology is understood. Because for the folks that know, and I'm part of the problem, we speak as though the people who don't know know exactly what we're saying, right? So in the effort of trying to share this information, sometimes the actual impact is lost. So when it comes to the workload behind building this KYC and, knowing your customer and customer relationship management, because those acronyms in itself can become overwhelming for an entrepreneur, what is sort of a key takeaway that you guys will share with a small business owner that may feel overwhelmed by all this information? So I'll start with Kesha.
Don't get scared. You can actually do it one customer at a time. I know sometimes we look at a mountain of paper and we're like, oh my gosh, that's quite a lot. But going and doing KYC one customer at a time, actually, you will get to where you need to be. And it also helps you to be more thorough and to get that clean data instead of trying to do batches at a time. So as a existing customer comes in, you go and you do your KYC with them and you do your continuous updating with them. So it's like, don't feel like it's this impossible task that you can't get by. It's actually literally as a customer comes in or interacts with you, you want to update that KYC information or even start it if you haven't already done so.
What about you, Louis?
Wow, there's a lot. I think that was
just
a really
give us one.
Yeah. So I would say for the small business, for the person who's doing a lot of things themselves or has a few people working with them, you can really pull a lot of it together yourself, but at the same time, you've got to know what to outsource, right? You can't do every single piece yourself or you'll get buried in it because that's not your core business.
That's so important. It's so easy to fall into I need to get this done regardless. And then the opportunity cost, it becomes more expensive for you because you're spending all this time on something that you kind of outsource, something that you're taking an entire day for. You'll pay somebody and they take an hour to do it. And it's easy to get caught up in that. If you are just joining us and you want to see the presentation that was we had at the beginning of this session, you can sign up for the live show. It is the link in the bio as well as, it's right there, right? Sign up for that information. And we actually use the KYC methodology. And when you sign up, we give you information based on our live shows and your feedback. Barry, I've seen your question. And we are actually focused on the entrepreneur today as it relates to the banks. That's something that will have to be addressed in a separate event. When we're looking at the opportunity cost, right? I mentioned earlier that, sometimes you see this task at hand, you want to get it done, but it's overwhelming. I found that in my own experience, when you collect data and you collect it correctly, it lowers the reach to the potential audience. What do I mean by that? When you start with that data and you have that information, we can actually now send one email that's customized to 1,000 people, and they each of them feel as though they've been given an email unique to them, right? And that's where the opportunity cost is. And within your presentation, you had this idea of customer acquisition costs. And I think that's so important for entrepreneurs to learn, because there's a value placed on getting that customer, right? So marketing spend, social media, content, things like that. Can you elaborate more on the reduction of that cost? Because the whole point of business in terms of for profit is to lower that cost, that marketing cost, and ensure that you keep that customer. So can you expand on that, on when it comes to customer acquisition costs for the small business owner?
So there's a range of costs, like you said, that are associated with acquiring a customer. By using it, by getting the data, making it more targeted, it actually helps you to, like, instead of having to do a broad reaching marketing campaign, you can now just say, okay, user X or John X, I'm going to send him an email specifically because this thing that we are selling now is something that he's shown interest in, or it's something that will help him in his area. I'm going to go from the angle of, let's say, a policy, an insurance policy. I'm not an insurance agent by in any means, shape, or form. I'm not affiliated with anyone, but let's say that you have this insurance agency has information on me. In my mid-30s, I'm about to buy a home. They can now target their marketing efforts to me wanting to acquire a home, as opposed to sending me multiple emails or doing multiple marketing campaigns at targeting me for their full range of products. By knowing who your customer is and where they are at in their particular stage in life, you're able to be very focused. And by being very focused, you can minimize your spend on some of these activities to gain that customer.
Good point. Yeah. Good point. Go ahead.
If I can add to that, when you think about the time cost too, right? When you don't really know who your customers are, you spend a lot of time trying different avenues and trying, even the time spent with a customer now, when you have to do whatever your onboarding process is, you have to think about that as a factor in your business. How many customers can you really deal with, if it takes you a day, for instance, to actually get something done?
Yeah, I want to actually talk about that onboarding conversation, because back in the day when I didn't have gray hair, I used to sell cars. And one of the things that we did, there was a lot of people, a lot of people. So we used to take the information, file it away, and I had to move office at a point in time. So there's all these files. I look back at that now and just chuckling, but I have 10 years of technology experience now. So it's a little different. So this idea of customer relationship management, right? So the CRM, which is that's the acronym, relates to just the first contact with your customer and what happens after them. Because in your presentation, Luis, you mentioned some of us already have that data within social media. So can you connect the dots between that idea of filling out a form and the information that is on your social media? How can a small business owner use that data to get customers?
Wow. So when we think about a lot of the order forms that we have to do to even check out from an e-commerce platform, right? You still have to enter in all of your your basic information, your address, all of that, when a lot of that might actually be on the social media profile. That if you've collected that as part of your engagement with that customer, it's in your CRM, then some CRMs, it's almost like a mail merge, right? But you can start to pre-fill some of those forms and really, instead of asking the customer to put in their name and address again, say, hey, is this right? This is what we got from your social media. And, is this correct? And it just makes that process a little bit smoother. And, when you can present someone, hey, you said you wanted to buy this product. Here's the order form just for you, based on what we know about you, based on what our what you've set in this order, and that just makes it a lot more easier for your customers to convert, right? That's yeah.
If I can just add to that, by moving your data from paper to a CRM, you're able to not just like see it at a glance, but create a 360 profile of your customer. So you're able to know who this person is, what they've ordered over time, and just put it all together in a digital format that helps you to, at a glance, know, okay, this is this particular customer, these are their likes, their dislikes. So it helps you to create that holistic view of who your customer is, without having to flip through book binders and binders of paper to figure it out.
Gosh, getting some flashbacks there. Whew. All right, so we're gonna go on a quick break. Before we do, we are going to elaborate a little bit more on the $24 billion in suspicious transactions within Trinidad and Tobago. We're looking at the cost factor of not adapting to the digital world that we are forced to live in. So we'll see you on the other side of the break. Welcome back to Straight Off the Bat. We're here talking about knowing your customer, which has its own acronym, KYC, and the value proposition it has to you as a small business owner. So hard, like, let's be honest, it is difficult. It doesn't matter how much somebody tells you need to do something. It's just hard, right? I mean, there's a whole weight loss industry, multi-billion-dollar industry for that, right? So when it comes to transitioning online, what I've realized based on like previous guests we had, Antonio Vento from RBC, talking about the cost of not implementing cybersecurity, because we are now shifting to an online behavior. And with that, there comes specific steps that you have to take. Regardless of if you want to or not, that's where a customer is. So when it comes to the KYC space, what is some of the pitfalls that businesses are more likely to fall in if they don't invest in KYC?
Wow, good question. So if they don't invest in it, well, it really depends, I suppose, on what their business is, right? But there's, of course, too many cases we hear of ransomware and, even the oil pipeline in the US getting shut down. If they're vulnerable, think about how many small businesses that are just, running things as they have for the last 20 years that aren't really prepared for that. And it's almost, I don't want to say a matter of time, because some have really worked to keep up and keep things up to date. But if you are a small business owner who's not really thought too much about it, how many things are sitting in your email right now that have a lot of value to you, might have a lot of value to your customers, that, hey, one person gets your email password and everything is lost? Then you really have to think about, at the very least, are you using strong enough passwords? Are you using a password manager? Are you using multi-factor authentication, which is a really fancy way of saying, not just a username and password, but something else? So, all those things keep your account secure, whatever accounts you're using. And, things like WhatsApp, where that's basically just your phone number. So, hey, you don't put credit on your phone for a little while. Did you sell? Somebody else gets your number. Now they can take your WhatsApp if they want. They may not get that historical information, but if that number is hooked up to your social media or whatever, now you're at risk of those accounts, really being lost. So I think cybersecurity, it starts really simple. Have strong passwords. use more than just your password, and be aware of the systems you're using. Look, I'm not here to say that Google and Gmail are the best thing in the world, but they are audited for extremely high levels of security every year. So if you're going to store sensitive information somewhere, it's likely better to do it there than on your own laptop, or to do it, some in your regular email. And that's what third-party systems are for, right? Is to take some of that complexity and that burden off of you as an individual entrepreneur, and share some of that risk, essentially.
And if I were to...
I recently learned that you can get hacked on WhatsApp, which is, I didn't even know that was a thing. The idea of two authentication factor is important to be applied to your WhatsApp. So guys, if you don't have that, please go and do it right after you watch this, because a lot of the times the apps that we use are connected to our phones, and once they get access to that, you don't know what's going to happen next. Sorry about that, Kesha, you're about to say something?
Oh, yes, I was actually going to talk about the risk of fraud to you as a business, about not knowing who your customer is. We hear too many times in the news, persons got robbed because they went to sell something to someone in person. But if they had taken the time to know exactly who that person was, they may have mitigated that risk a bit.
Yes, that's such an important factor, especially with it's just the increase of popularity with Facebook Marketplace. That is such a real world example now that we're living in. And within your presentation, you spoke about transparency, which for a lot of people, they may not necessarily understand what that means. And one of the biggest lies on the internet is, I've read these terms and conditions. So elaborate a little bit more on why businesses need to be transparent and how it connects with the data they're collecting.
Wow. Well, if we take it back a little bit further, even, those regulations we talked about are applied across the entire value chain. So if you as the business at the end are not necessarily doing your part to uphold that, then you're creating, issues for everybody. But, when it comes to the day-to-day, your risk of things like chargebacks is going to go up if you don't know who your customers are, right? Kesha, do you want to add anything there?
Well, from a business point of view, you want to be transparent to your customers, because you don't want to be labeled as a business that lies to their customers. So being open and honest, particularly with what you're collecting your data for and how you're going to use it, is essential to building customer confidence in your organization.
That point of accountability, more specifically the FIU, why should, an the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, why should businesses keep abreast of what their responsibility is in that space?
Well, apart from wanting to not be somebody who is like being part of money laundering and financing of terrorism, there are also international requirements against for Trinidad and Tobago to be compliant. Just last year, we were finally taken off the FATF gray list. What that means is that we are no longer being overly monitored for us being a region or being a country that is seen as a tax haven or a money laundering haven. And we want to make sure that we're abreast of what FIU and Central Bank is doing, because we don't want Trinidad and Tobago to go back on that list, because it now reduces the ability for us to engage with other regions and other countries and be part of their financial systems. So it's on us as individuals to make sure that we don't put our country back on that list.
Okay. So we all have a responsibility there. That's good to know. All right. So we spoke about the cost factors. So there was a sort of a gauge of 500 to 1,000 US a month. And I can imagine some small businesses are like, what? Catch me outside with that. Can you tell me something that's cheaper? So if someone has watched this live and said, you know what, I want to invest in this. I'm using my Excel spreadsheet. I'm using WhatsApp. This is overwhelming. Where should they start? What processes? Because even within the tools, there's a theory behind it. But then in addition to that, there might be some free tools you can use. So I mentioned before MailChimp. MailChimp does have a free plan. And guys, we will put all of this in the emails that we send out to people who sign up to our Facebook Live show, where you can actually get information directly to your inbox. But specifically in terms of your advice, we have your time now. Where should the business start with this KYC?
Well, I can speak from not so much the technology side of it. So it really depends on the cost. The software that you're going to use and the cost that you're going to incur really depends on the level of KYC that you want to do. If you just want to collect your customer name and email address, obviously they're free to really cheap options that are out there, HubSpot being one of them. But if it is that you want to get really detailed, personal, sensitive information from customers, you're actually going to have to bite the bullet, for lack of a better term right now, and pay for a more expensive system, because the security around acquiring and keeping person's sensitive information, it goes up the deeper that you go. You don't want to keep a copy of somebody's ID on your phone. If your phone gets stolen, then that copy of that person's personal sensitive information gets stolen as well. So it depends on to what degree and how deep you want to go with regards to collecting KYC information.
Luis, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, there's another option. I know we've talked about HubSpot and MailChimp. There's another one called EngageBay that does a lot of things. It really depends on what level of automation and what you're really trying to accomplish. And for some folks, even using something like Zapier, Zapier, is a really great way to tie together some of the different tools you might already be using or that you might be using. So, it's that cost, it really depends, like Kesha said, on what level of depth you want and also what level of automation you want. So doing things still semi-manually is, of course, going to be cheaper, but you have to factor in your time to that as well. So it's a lot to consider.
Okay, so last question directed to both of you, given your point of view. What advice would you give to small business owners on downtime right now under the state of emergency we're in right now? It can become overwhelming as a business owner. So with this idea of getting your information from your customers, getting that data, what should they be doing right now?
I guess right now they can, in this downtime, just take time to digitize their records if it's not already digitized, because we know a lot of people have stacks of paper, and just go through them and just get them from the paper stage to some sort of electronic format, because it's going to benefit you greatly to not have to, like I said before, flip through binders of paper to get the information that you need.
Great advice. What about you, Luis?
Yeah, and I would say take the time to skill up a little bit, right? There's so much good content on YouTube. If you look for it, you can absolutely learn anything. So if you're really out there trying to build your business, take the time during lockdown, spend those couple hours you might have been out with friends otherwise, and learn something new, because that's only going to help you going forward.
That is great advice, guys. Thank you so much. And that can be supported by all the platforms that were mentioned here today. Have free options to skill up on their platforms. MailChimp allows you to get a certificate. So even if, if things doesn't work out and you have to close a business, you can still have a skill set that you can actually have somebody would want to pay you for it. So, and these are things that are free to you. And thanks again to Kesha and Luis from Caripay. If you're just joining us, we are over. But that's okay. Once we close off this live, you can press the replay as well as sign up, right there. sign up and be notified the next time we go live, and give us some insight as to future guests that you would like to first interview. Thanks again for joining us. Make sure to make sure to stay home. Please stay home. And we will get through this together. I'll see you next episode of Straight Off the Bat. Bye, guys.